All right, looks like we have just about everyone. Well, thank you all for getting on our Zoom for Webinar Wednesday. We're going to be doing these every Wednesday for the month of May. Can everyone hear me? Nod your heads. Okay.
I can hear you.
Awesome. If those of you who don't know, I am Shelby Cheney. I am the Membership and Program Coordinator for the Troy Chamber. Today we have Marcus Thompson, who's the founder of Expedient Technology, which started in 2004. He is going to talk today about ways to work from home securely, as some of us are still working from home securely and maybe going back, who knows. Just a few other things. If you guys do have questions, down at the bottom, there is a toolbar where you can put your questions in the chat. We will have Marcus answer them at the end. Or if you just want to wait till afterwards, you can either email me or email Marcus and we can get those questions answered. So I am going to go ahead and just let Marcus take the lead.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Marcus Thompson. We're Expedient Technology Solutions. We're located just south of the Dayton Mall, but we have customers all over the Miami Valley. We're an IT consulting company that effectively for the bulk of our work, we help small businesses as their IT department. So the presentation today is really not a technical one from I guess the audience isn't technically, or I'm not aiming for a technology person. I'm aiming for really somebody who's working from home. That's part of some sort of organization. And I know we're in a kind of a unknown period of time here with whether working from home is going to become a bit of a new norm. I've seen, a lot of customers who've experienced this quick working remote scenario, and a lot of those who have maybe some office space constraints or growth that's needing more people. They've actually started talking about working from home as a strategy now versus just a quick response to the pandemic. So just wanted to bring some tips for everybody, and any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat, and we'll we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer those. So first tip, it will click for me there. So first tip is beware of phishing. So I'm sure everybody is aware of phishing, and a lot of these probably are just reinforcements to what you've heard a lot of, but they're just really the top 10 things that we're seeing from a cybersecurity perspective. So beware of phishing. So phishing emails by definition are emails intended to get you to click on something, to download something, to open a file. It used to be, in the past you would see it was pretty easy to pick out a phishing email because it was usually in some sort of broken English or just really off topic, somebody offering money or something like that. But phishing has become a lot more sophisticated, and they make them look very, very convincing. Some of them too, and as another one of my slides down later talks about credentials and things like that. But a lot of times we're seeing that somebody might actually get their account compromised, and once somebody has your credentials and they're logging in as you into your email, they actually have free reign to send to your contacts. So you may see a phishing email come from somebody that you actually know, and so that's something that even if you know the person, you need to be very scrutinizing of the messages that come through and what you're opening or clicking on from that perspective. Another tip for this, if many of you are using Office 365, there is a feature of Office 365 that is an add-on. Unfortunately, I wish they would make it a standard, but Advanced Threat Protection from Microsoft will actually take your messages and scan any type of attachment in a sandbox. So what they do is they open up those messages and make sure that there's nothing that is malicious going on with those messages, so you can ensure that those messages or those attachments are safe. They also will scrutinize the links. So a URL that comes across, they will actually be able to redirect anything that is malicious and not allow you to open it. So that's something that if you don't have that turned on in Office 365, you should really consider that. Fake news and malicious websites. So I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. I'm trying to speak as loud as I can here. I've got my equipment turned all the way up. I'm not sure what might be happening here. One thing to realize, and I know we're fairly far into this already, but something that happened early on was that somebody weaponized the coronavirus, the Johns Hopkins website. And so they made it where it was a fake version of it. And when you went to their website, it actually would deploy malware that could steal your information. And so even if you want to be very, very aware of the links that you click on, or even from email, but also from websites. So, you know, you might be on a social media site and click on something and it might look legitimate, but unfortunately it pushes you over to those malicious websites. So just be very, very careful with that. Strong passwords. I'm sure everybody is probably tired of password, advice, but it's still a big issue. And so make sure that you're using strong passwords. The current recommendations from cybersecurity compliance world is 8+ characters. And instead of using a password, make it a passphrase, and that should help. And so you also want to make sure that you're mixing upper and lowercase and using special characters if possible. The longer the password, the harder it is to break. You also want to make sure that you're using different passwords on different systems. Because if you use, we do dark web scanning for a lot of our customers, and what happens is if let's just say someone like a LinkedIn, which has been a number of years ago, had a breach and all their passwords got exposed. And so that password that you used at LinkedIn gets put out there on the dark web. And then subsequently, if you're using that on other sites, they can now associate that password with your email. Even if you use variations of that password, it's pretty easy to guess when it comes to those things. So make sure you're using different passwords on different systems. Consider using a password manager program. I utilize one of those, and it has plugins for web browsers. It has apps for your cell phone. You don't even have to remember the passwords at that point. You can create really long, complex passwords, even with a lot of them have a password generator that can just make it a bunch of random characters. And then all you have to know is either your master password or something like the app on my cell phone uses FaceTime, which, or not FaceTime, but Face ID on the Apple side of things, which if you have experienced it, this makes Face, the Face ID a little more complicated with the mask. But so I find myself either pulling it off to unlock my phone a lot or just trying to wait for the passcode to come back up. But use a password manager and keep your passwords separate. Use passwords based upon, or don't use passwords based upon personal information. That makes it really easy for somebody to gather intelligence on you. There's a lot of information out there on the dark web that is based upon your life that can be utilized. And then don't use passwords that can be found in any dictionary. The reason behind that is they use brute force dictionary attacks, where they actually just cycle through a list of, first of all, commonly used passwords, and then also the English dictionary in order to try to break into accounts. Multi-factor authentication. You may not have control over this at work. Hopefully different organizations have implemented this, because this is a very, It's not a silver bullet when it comes to password compromise, but it definitely helps. And so multi-factor authentication basically uses a username, a password, and some other factor in order to protect your accounts. You might be able to set this up on your banking accounts. I'm finding a lot of websites are actually making this kind of a standard, which is a positive. And so that third factor might be a code that comes across via a text. There might be an app that you install on your smartphone that allows you to either approve a login request or will provide you with a code. It used to be that people would have a small little token, and then that would give you a 6-character password that you would enter in. It just gets a little difficult to carry around enough tokens to satisfy all the websites. So there's a lot of apps that you can have multiple websites plugged into those type of things. I definitely recommend at least having that on a Microsoft 365 account, because that will also give you protection because of the fact that it's pretty wide open to anybody to try to log in as you throughout the world. So very, very, very strongly recommended. You could also, depending on the complexity or maturity, probably on a cybersecurity standpoint of an organization, there are additional things like either biometric or a USB key that you could kind of have to touch to approve those logins as well. But that's not typically seen too often in the small business world that I've seen. So credential phishing, this is what I kind of talked about a little while ago. You might click on something, you might be presented with a screen, or if you open an attachment that maybe hasn't been scanned through an adequate antivirus or sandboxing scenario, and it'll pop up a screen asking you to log in. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture your username and password. And then they want to use that username and password in order to get into the account as you. They can gather data. They could send emails as you in order to try to trick other people into it from a phishing perspective. But one thing to pay very, very close attention to is up in the address bar, you'll notice it's not an Office 365 URL. It's a different one. And you can see that that's pretty typical as a sign that you're not logging into the right place. If you get prompted for a username and password on something that you've clicked on, I typically won't enter it there. If, let's just say, for example, use LinkedIn again as an example. If I click on a link and it's bringing me to a LinkedIn login page, I might close that page and then reopen the page and go to LinkedIn directly and then enter that username and password in something. That way, they're not capturing those credentials. I can give you a really scary story related to credential phishing. We had a client that I won't name, but they basically work with investors to gather money. And so this person lost their credentials. They gave their credentials away to somebody. Somebody logged in as that person and then crafted emails with new bank routing information and sent it out to all their investors asking for funding. And that's thankfully a couple investors brought that to their attention. Now it's a client that I've been talking to for a while about implementing multi-factor authentication, because that would have really helped in that scenario. But if you receive something that looks like it's coming, and the anatomy of that too is that we found that her clicking on that and entering her credentials was because she received something from somebody she knew. So it was kind of a chain. So somebody gave away their credentials. They used that to send to an additional user. That person didn't scrutinize it enough because it came from a known vendor. And so they entered their credentials into that, and it just kind of snowballed. So definitely pay very, very close attention to where you might be putting your username and password into web pages on the internet. Basic network security. So you might not have a lot of control over this depending on your organization, but just the basics, keep Windows up to date. Those are all, Windows patches come out every month. Patch your third-party software. browsers like Firefox, Chrome, all of those have updates that need to be completed on a regular basis. Adobe Acrobat, Flash, a lot of third-party applications have become just as vulnerable as Microsoft Windows used to be. So make sure that you're just doing the basics on keeping patching updated. Keep your antivirus up to date. Make sure that that nothing has prevented it from getting the most recent updates, because it's constant. It's a constant cat and mouse game when it comes to viruses. And then ensure that you have an up-to-date home firewall. There are some firewall manufacturers out there that have had vulnerabilities published, and so it's easy for people to just get in there and get in through your home firewall. And that we'll talk about here in a second when it comes to VPN. That's why you really want to pay attention to that. But Wi-Fi networks at home. So make sure that you're not using the manufacturer's default username and password on the device, because if somebody is coming, close to your house, a neighbor, somebody could potentially just guess the random, admin or admin password that comes by default. Make sure that you're changing at least the password. A lot of them don't allow you to change the username, but at least change those passwords. And then ensure that you're using a Wi-Fi password with WPA2 encryption. That's something that, there's just a few options that you can select, but you want to make sure that WPA2 is selected, and then use a strong password on that. Separate work from home. So this is something that I think a lot of people don't think about, but we've had instances where maybe one of the kids jumped on the home computer or on the work computer and downloaded something that could then be transmitted into the corporate environment over the VPN or something like that. So do your best to keep your work computer isolated from home use at this point. Make sure you avoid, depending on what kind of computer you're using, because since this happened so fast, we had a lot of customers that weren't ready with laptops or work-owned computers to send home with their employees. And so you had a lot of customers incorporating home devices into their corporate networks, and it's a little scary from an IT perspective. But make sure that you're not storing sensitive data on home computers, because it's not as secure as what you would have if it was a corporate device, hopefully, including hard drive encryption. So if you work with any type of HIPAA data, any type of personally identifiable information, you don't want to store that at home. This is another tip that I haven't. I guess the older I get, the more I avoid some of these niceties like Alexa or Google Home. Just the stories that you hear about, where people are listening in to the conversations, and it might be for positive purposes of just trying to improve the service. I think Apple was doing that with Siri. They had a number of people that would just listen to conversations and make sure that the service was doing what it was supposed to do. But you might, depending on what your line of work is, you might decide to disable those, at least within the environment that you're doing your work. Virtual private networks. So again, with the quick work from home environment for a lot of people, one thing that you really want to avoid is just a remote desktop connection open to the internet. It used to be pretty widely used and not as vulnerable as it has turned out to be in more recent times. So remote desktop without a VPN, there's actually known vulnerabilities that just worm their way across the internet looking for those machines to be open, and ransomware can easily be deployed to your computer if it's just connected to the internet using remote desktop. So what you want to make sure that you're using is a VPN. And so a VPN basically is an end-to-end connection that allows, that encrypts the traffic between your computer and the work, usually firewall. I have on there, what is split tunneling? So split tunneling is something that you also want to make sure, especially working in the home environment. Split tunneling allows your computer at home to see both the network at home and the network at the office. And where that becomes an issue is that if there is another device on the network that gets infected, it could, in theory, transfer through that computer that's connected to both networks and get into your corporate environment, and that could be a big issue for your company. I know with my kids, I've got 2 high schoolers and 1 college age, and everybody came home, and I've got computers on dining room tables, on kitchen tables, just about everywhere in the house, and you just want to make sure that one of those does not infect the other. So also incorporate multi-factor authentication into your VPN client. So that's an area that you want to make sure that you're securing with that additional factor from a VPN perspective. Lastly, make sure you understand your company's security policies. Make sure that you understand what's required of you, especially in maybe a bring your own device kind of scenario where you're working from a home computer versus a corporate owned computer. So make sure that you understand what's required of you, and then also know that regulations such as PCI, HIPAA, 800-171, anything that your company may need to follow, still applies when you're working from home. And that's where, honestly, the hackers realize that everybody working from home, that the vulnerability is going to be with the end user at home, versus it's an easier attack for them to hit people at home than it is to hit the corporate network, because everybody's hardening their corporate networks. So make sure that you're not putting anything in jeopardy by putting that on at home. I was going to joke, I left it off, but I was going to joke to check your security, your company's policies on video chats. I don't know if you saw the weatherman who went on live TV without wearing pants. He said he was wearing shorts, but you want to make sure that you follow whatever your company's recommendations are there. So that's number 10 there. So like I said, very, very easy, hopefully non-technical, but just a reminder probably on a lot of the good basics of what needs to be done. But are there any questions? I haven't seen any.
I have 2 right here.
Okay.
All right, so there has been much comment about Zoom in the literature claiming that China has hacked in it and is reaping personal information. Have you heard anything about that?
So from what I've read on Zoom from a security standpoint, there's a couple things. One, and I'm not a Zoom user other than today here. I'm more of a Microsoft Teams because it's integrated within our Office 365 environment. But there's a couple things with Zoom. One is that I believe that there are some settings related to not allowing people into the meeting automatically. So people have created applications to actually, they call it Zoom war dialing. So they just randomize Zoom meeting IDs and then can jump into a meeting automatically if you don't have the settings set correctly. So I think the setting that you want there is to force people into a lobby where they have to be approved into the meeting. Now, the other scary thing that I've read about was that Zoom, by mistake, was routing Zoom calls through some servers in China. And from a technical perspective, China kind of has a lot of autonomy over their internet traffic. And so that's something where you want to make sure, I'm not sure that you can do anything on that from an end user perspective, but it's something that you just want to be maybe aware of what you're discussing on a Zoom call, because it is very possible that something could be misconfigured and allow information to get out.
Thank you. Next question I have is, do password managers handle 2-factor authentication?
Typically not. I think typically what I've seen is that it handles the username and password, and then the multi-factor piece of it is either some sort of application or like I said, token.
Okay. Awesome.
We use one, and I think it's pretty widespread. It's called Duo. It's now owned by Cisco, but it even has an Apple Watch component. So if you go to log in, it'll pop up on your phone and allow you to approve or deny on your phone, but it'll also just pop up and you can just hit approve on your Apple Watch. So it makes it pretty seamless, but just that extra factor that makes it difficult for somebody else to log in.
Good. So the next one I have, how do you effectively secure information on a OneDrive?
So OneDrive is encrypted by default within the Microsoft Cloud, and your username and password is typically going to be the gateway into OneDrive. Now, from a corporate perspective, there are some rules that are in Office 365 that you may want to consider at the business level that deal with sharing that information out of OneDrive. I'm a little nervous when it comes to OneDrive, when it comes to the ease of which somebody could share that out with somebody externally or share it out with their home computer and grab that data. So in some of our environments that are pretty security conscious, we actually disable a lot of those features.
Interesting. What are some good ways to protect websites?
I'm not sure from which perspective, I guess. I'm not
That's
sure.
a good question. Let me ask them. Actually, I'm just going to unmute Mark, wherever he's at.
Okay.
There you go.
You hear me?
Yep.
So I'm doing this for my wife. It's her business. She's doing some other stuff right now, but she's just concerned about can her website has links to her e-learning site and some other things that she does business-wise. She just wants to know how easy can somebody go in there and hack that? What kind of security issues they have just for having that website?
So at a very, very basic level, you want to use SSL encryption for the website from a data perspective. So what that does is it encrypts the communication between the website and the web browser. So that's the very, very basic, like almost everybody should have that by now, even on a standard homepage for your company's brochure website.
Okay, what was that again?
It's just an SSL certificate.
Okay.
Getting more and more complicated, depending on the platform that the website is running. So I don't know if you've ever heard of something called WordPress, but WordPress runs a lot of websites out there. It's a content management system. WordPress has, because it's so widespread, it also has a lot of attacks against it. And so there are vulnerabilities that get discovered, and people then have the ability to break into the WordPress site, and then they can modify code. So that's probably the scariest part of it. And at that point, it could be, depending on what the website is, if you're taking e-commerce transactions, then somebody could interject code that could capture those transactions happening in real time. So what you want to do with that is make sure that you're updating whatever that content management system is on a regular basis. There's always updates for WordPress. And so somebody should be in charge of making sure that those things are kept up to date.
Okay.
Further and further down the road, there's things with coding, making sure that coding is done well, but it doesn't sound like we're talking that complicated, but you could have penetration tests against websites and things like that, but that might get, if there's more questions on that, I'd be glad to take that one offline.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
The next question I have, and if anyone has any others, please put them in the chat, is what password manager program would you recommend?
That's a great question. There's a lot of them now. I've used RoboForm for a long time, and it just it was one of the earlier ones that was out there, and it's pretty simple for me to use. There are things like KeePass. There's a whole slew of them. If I do a quick Google search, some of them even come up depending on, like I'm a LifeLock member, and so I think I get a free subscription to something. I can't remember what it is. Every time I log in, it asks me if I want to use it. So, but if you do a password manager Google search, there's just a lot of them. What I would also do is just make sure that there aren't any you might look at the news side of the search too and make sure there's nothing posted about any type of breaches within there. I know there was one at one point, I don't remember the name, so I'm not going to say it, but what I was thinking, but there's a lot of them out there, but if they've had some sort of security attack against them, I would try to avoid them moving forward. But LastPass is one. There's Google. There's some that work within your browsers, just like a Google Chrome can actually synchronize passwords across different devices. When it comes to that, a Google search that I just pulled up. PC Mag has the best password managers for 2020. So you could take a look at those lists and see which ones might make sense for you. They all do. I got to think they all do about the same for the most part.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Marcus, for giving that presentation. I don't have any other questions. Oh wait, here's one. Best VPN service.
So there's two different types of VPN services for that. So the VPN service I was referring to really is more related to your corporate work. So that's typically going to be something your company provides to you. I've heard advertisements for VPN services for home, but that's not something I don't personally have a lot of experience with because I haven't used one myself, unfortunately. But I think that one might be more like a password manager kind of question too. So if you do a Google search for VPN for home, maybe, and see what kind of comes up with that. And ExpressVPN is the first one that came up as an ad. There's also one called NordVPN. Those are two that I've heard of. I haven't necessarily personally had experience with them. I did have, one experience with one of those from a cybersecurity perspective is that we had one of our people was using one of the VPN services on his home computer. And when he logged into Office 365, it recognized it. We have some monitoring on our system that would show a login from a strange place. And because that VPN was routing through, I think it was Panama or something for some reason, it notified us that his account was being logged into from Panama. And so you might want to make sure that you're using some sort of US VPN when it comes to that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for answering those questions for us, Marcus. We greatly appreciate it. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to either email them to me and I can forward them on to Marcus or Kathy and see if they can get you an answer. This afternoon, I will be sending out this webinar to everyone. It'll also be posted to the Troy Chambers website. That way you can look at it there as well as the other ones we have done in the past few weeks. There aren't any other questions. That's all we have. So thank you, Marcus, for doing this today.
Perfect. Thank you.